Well, hello, Cheryl.
Hi, Marshall.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm really happy to be here.
Good, I'm as well. It is quite a pleasure being able to sit down and chat with you today. I've, followed your work since we've met just a few years ago. And every chance I get to hear you talk, it's a treat. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Mhm.
I know I'm honored. I'm honored that you wanted me to be part of this project. I really am.
Absolutely. This is all about, finding ways to uplift the women who are just really killing it. So when we decided upon, doing this, I knew that you were somebody that we wanted to reach out to. So I'm glad you said yes.
Of course.
Let's start at the very beginning. Tell me about the time you grew up in.
I grew up in the 50s and 60s in very turbulent times politically, not too dissimilar to the times we're in now. I grew up in Bowness before it was part of Calgary,
Right.
so I kind of felt like a small town kid
Mm,
growing up. And I have lived my entire life in this community.
mhm,
So I I guess I carry a lot of that experience of growing up in those times, through the civil rights movement and um, various political movements that were going on at the time. And that has impacted my work and my life. And it also um, allows me to feel I just recognize turbulent times and I know that we do move through them.
Really curious for you, because I know that you have a long history of writing. When did you decide to begin a career as a writer?
I don't recall ever wanting any other career. Even other things that I considered were related to writing,
Mm.
including, being a sports broadcaster. At one point, I thought I might want to travel around the world and go to sports events and report upon them. Um, yeah, I when I was in grade 4, I wrote a story called My Brother and I, and Mrs. Tucker, my teacher, read it out loud to the class. And then she gave it to Mr. Levitt, the principal of the school, and he read it to his class. Saying, no, I was in grade 3. Mrs. Tucker was grade 3. And later on that day, some grade 6s stopped me in the hallway and said, "Oh, we really liked that story Mr. Levitt read to us." And I thought, "Oh, you can talk to people who don't know you exist or who didn't, would never pay attention to you. I'm just a little grade 3er, and these important grade 6 people are interacting with me." And for sure, that was the moment where I thought, I would like to do that.
Mm,
I mean, when you're little, you don't have the exact, I want to be a writer or
mm,
anything. I grew up in Bowness was a very working class, and there was a lot of poverty around, and I didn't know any writers, and I never got to read Canadian books in school. Um, Nor did I have any positive representations of Black people in literature. So the idea of being a writer seemed kind of ridiculous,
mhm.
but that was the moment for sure where I thought, if I could do this, I would be happy.
Well, and what I find so fascinating and so lovely about the work that you do is you don't shy away from talking about hard things. I'm really curious for you, what makes a good story?
A good story has to have some element of struggle.
Mm,
So, you mentioned that in my work I do talk about difficult things. And a lot of my work is personal and based on things that have happened to me or people that I know. But a good story for me is one where I believe the world that it's set in and I believe the characters. And that can apply if it's, I like fantasy a lot. Um, and so the worlds that I enter into when I'm reading a fantasy or watching a film or seeing a play that's set in a fantastical realm, it doesn't have to be a realm that I actually know exists, but I know it exists, right? Like you're totally pulled in and you believe that world. And so for me, it's a struggle that someone goes through in a world that I believe, and I believe that person exists. And I will go the rest of my life knowing that that character that some person created
Mhm.
exists.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I often say for me that it really is about holding up a mirror to the rest of the world and saying, this is what we've created and this is what we can do to make things better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I first saw your work, I want to say in 2017 in Edmonton. It was John Ware. I believe it was at Workshop West.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I went to see that with Gina. And it was just like such a beautiful work. Um, and then a little bit after that, we got to do the playwrights unit together.
That's right.
And I don't know if you remember, but we were talking once about writing and how oftentimes it can be very isolating.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just want to know how do you navigate some of that isolation in writing?
Well, first, I want to say I do remember very much. I remember meeting you, and you were so young when we were doing that unit. And I absolutely loved the piece that you did, and you just transformed into a character that I believed. And I loved that. And I just want you to know I appreciate you, and I think you're so talented. And I am enriched by the
Mm,
stories that you're telling as well. Um, in some ways, that isolation, I enjoy it because I get to go deep into a world where there are characters that I want to exist, right? So you mentioned my play, John Ware Reimagined.
mm,
In that play, I got to go to his cabin in 1892 or 1894. And I also got to bring him into my grade 7 classroom. And so the isolation is a place where we get to be the god of a world, and we get to create something that we want to bring into being. Um, I think the way I deal with it, though, is by writing different kinds of things. So when you're writing a novel, you're very alone. You're
mm,
very alone until you send it to a publisher or your agent or whatever, or you might have a trusted writing partner, as I do. I hope you have someone in your life that is your go to. Okay, this is a first draft, and they'll give you honest critique, but they won't um, destroy you. That is a very alone kind of world, writing a novel or an article, even. But theater is different. Theater, yes, you're alone when you're creating the piece, but very quickly other people come into it, and actors bring it to life, and directors have ideas that you hadn't thought about. And I think for me, the reason I work in so many different realms, including film and theater, is to counterbalance that. If I'm doing a retreat and I'm alone for a long time, a couple, 2, 3 weeks, it gets to be too much. So I think that's the reason why I work in a lot of different forms, is because it is a little bit lonely sometimes.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
I create community like you've done. Yeah.
So I know that you've worked in like broadcasting and journalism, sports, all that stuff. But you also bring a lot of those skills of investigation into your writings as well. I know in the unit you were doing the play about Annie.
Annie
Um,
Saunders, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the amount of work that you did investigating that whole world and creating that world as well was just so brilliant. So when you're writing a piece, what is your investigative journey?
Well, it starts with curiosity about someone. You know, I love history, and one of the foundations of my work is bringing forward the stories of people like Annie Saunders, who folks haven't heard of. Part of that is because it's important to me for people to recognize that Black people have been here for longer than yesterday. Um, and so when I encounter a character, sometimes it's almost like No, I call her a character. She was a real person. And sometimes a historical person, it's almost like they speak to you. They are finding you, or they are waiting for you to find them and tell their story. That's what it feels like sometimes. So it starts with that, and then the process of investigation is just about going down rabbit holes. And I love it. I can disappear into a rabbit hole for 3 days and barely come up to eat. I just love it so much. It's very time consuming. Um, Black history in this part of the world hasn't been well documented or
Mm,
preserved, and so I have to find a lot of primary sources often. And I have also learned that I can't trust the usual types of archives
mm,
necessarily, because um, there are so many mistakes. One example I'll share, which I've shared many times, is I went looking in the census of 1911 for a certain person, a Black person who I knew was living in Calgary at the time.
mhm,
And I found the person, but I thought, oh, what's going on? Like, this person is listed as Norwegian on the census. And I thought, okay, maybe it's the wrong person, but maybe it's someone else by the same name. Dug deeper and realized, no, this is the person definitely. And then I looked on that census and I saw there were about 12 people in an apartment building in downtown Calgary that were all listed as Norwegian. And then I started cross referencing with some other sources that I had. Turns out they were all Black. So I think what happened is the transcriber, the handwriting was poor and the person wrote Negro beside
mm,
these names. And then the person who transcribed and was typing it out was like, but that can't be. That can't be. There can't have been 12 Black people in this apartment building in Calgary in 1911, because the official documents say there were only, you know, a few dozen Black people in all of Alberta or whatever. Or maybe they just genuinely misread the handwriting. Who knows, right? I have no way of knowing what
mhm,
happened, but I know that I can't trust those documents, and I know that often our numbers are undercounted. Of course, I became curious about who are those other 12 people, and so that ended up being, a 2-week rabbit hole where I then just had to go down. And so sometimes I go down those rabbit holes and I find someone that needs to be in the story,
mm,
um, which is amazing, and it expands my awareness of what Black life was like in the city in which I live at that time. It expands my awareness of what life was like for other communities of non-white, non-European people, and how did they interact with us. Um, you mentioned my piece about Annie Saunders called Shh. And there are 3 characters in that piece. One is Annie Saunders, a Black woman, one is a Blackfoot woman, and one is a white woman who was from a prominent family at the time. And I love doing stories that are about how were different communities interacting, breaking through that binary of always thinking about Black and white, or Indigenous and white, or Chinese and white, or whatever, all the different communities that were here. And instead, branching off and saying, no, we in those communities, Black and Indigenous people, were having all kinds of great stories going on that nobody knows about, because that's not where the sort of the gaze of the historical documents was. So uh, I love that kind of work so much, and I really appreciate the question about the process. I don't often get to talk about that process, but that's a kind of a little snippet. I
mhm,
could go on for another
of
two
course.
hours, but
So with John Ware and Annie Saunders, what is it like bringing historical figures to life?
I feel a lot of responsibility toward those people, and sometimes it's like, um, how do I do right by someone who lived, who I didn't know, and they have no relatives that I've been able to find. So I am interpreting their story through my own lens and my own life. So John Ware is a good example of someone who had to operate in a world that was very white. It's not that there weren't Black people in his life, there were, and he had Black community, but the world that he was operating in as a rancher and as a cowboy, that was quite a white world. And I make assumptions about how he felt about that, but that's assumptions that come from my life and
Right.
my experiences, right? And so I do want to, I want to leave open the possibility that I'm wrong, that he, in the case of John Ware or Mildred, his wife, or especially I feel a sense of obligation to his children because I knew a couple of them, right? I was a little kid and they were old people, but
Mm.
and in the case of Annie Saunders, I want to feel like they would appreciate the story, even if there's some aspect of it that I got wrong.
Right.
Um, a gift to be able to bring those stories forward, though, because those stories have touched the lives of people that kind of need them, right?
Mhm.
Um, After the play that you saw, John Ware Reimagined, a young Black man approached me and said, I have to wear a cowboy hat every July because I work for X company
Mm.
and I have to go to the stampede parties and I always felt so awkward and out of place. And he says, now I wear that hat and those boots with such pride and I feel like I'm channeling this person. So that's a real gift to be able to bring those stories to life and to make people care about or to help people care
Yeah.
about these figures.
And giving them permission to exist in that world as well, even if it is a world that they feel like they don't belong in.
Marshall, that is what those figures did for me, right? Like I've lived my whole life in Alberta, and lots of times I have to go to places where there's hostility toward me just because of what I look like,
Mm.
where lots of people are looking over like, what's she doing here? And those figures that walked in those spaces before me, they are the people I draw strength from to hold my head up and say, nobody's going to tell me I don't belong here. You know, John Ware lived right there, or Annie Saunders' laundry facility was right here in this town. So nobody's going to tell me I can't be here.
Mm.
And it does, I think, give younger folks a sense of belonging to this place and a sense of awareness that there were Black people in these spaces all along. There is no part of this province where Black people have not been since the time of contact. Um, and not just been and existed, but worked to make space, right? My ancestors worked to make space for me, both my blood ancestors and my place ancestors, like Annie Saunders and John Ware.
So you mentioned ancestors. I know that writing in your family is a gift shared by all. You talked about Clam and Miranda. We also know that you're co-writing a new novel. What can you share about this new novel that you're co-writing with Miranda?
Yes. So Miranda, my daughter, is one of my favorite collaborators, and she's done music for lots of my projects. One day I just happened to mention to Miranda that I'd taken a train trip from Winnipeg to Vancouver with two cousins when I was 14, when we were all 14. And we were unsupervised without parents because the porters were Black. Most of them were people from the community. And even though maybe I didn't know them, they knew me, right? Their eyes were on us. And so we were just running all over this train, just having the greatest time. Um, we got taken into a sleeping car because that was one of the perks of being Black when you were a kid, is you could ride in and get a sleeping car for the same amount as just a regular train ticket. Um, yeah, so the writing gene, and then being married to a writer, it's poor Miranda and Chandra. They had no hope. Chandra's a midwife, but
Right.
she's also a very good writer.
They had no
Yeah, so
choice.
yeah.
Um, so now that you have begun this writing with the next generation of writers, um, what advice would you give to young writers today?
One thing that I would say to young writers, something that I've said to you before, stay in community with the people who love and support you and your work, because you will have lots of times when someone tries to minimize or diminish you or your work. Somebody will tell you, nobody cares about that story. Or somebody will tell you, you didn't do a good job. That's not good writing. It's not good enough. So those people who walk with you, who will stand with you, who do offer constructive words about how you can make things better, but who absolutely believe in you and believe in your vision, keep those people. Keep those people. Um, Uplift them as well. Build a community of people who will help you get your stories out there. That's, I think, probably the most important piece of advice. The other one, I'm almost hesitant to say it because it sounds like such a cliche, but you have to remember how important your story is. There's somebody down the road, one day you'll be my age and there will be young people who need your stories, just as, you say that my work has had an impact on you. So just keep the faith, keep the belief that what you do matters, and it will find its way into the lives and hearts of people who need it.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for all of the gifts you've given us today. It's really appreciated. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me here today, Marshall. Hi, Kamika.
Hello, Cheryl.
Thank you for saying yes to this interview today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I have so many questions for you, I barely know where to start. So I think I will start with your work that I've seen. And I would love to know more about how you got those projects made and why you chose those particular stories to tell.
They're very close to my heart. Home is Where is a micro short that we actually created for a road grant. There's these two men experiencing homelessness, and we follow their journey of how one of them is trying to get money. And my favorite shot is actually this shot where you look through onto the character and he's looking through the windshield. And it heart wrenches me because every time I see these people at the stop signs or at the intersections, I want to do more than give them money or give them a water bottle or give them food. Like, I want to help them, but I can't because I'm only one person. And I wanted to illustrate that in the film, that although we might not be able to find this person a house, sometimes just looking at them and
Recognizing
acknowledging them
their humanity.
exactly is important.
That
And
came through beautifully in the film, the humanity of those people.
thank you. I appreciate that. I think we wanted to do a surprise that he goes to the liquor store, because I constantly hear people saying, oh, I don't want to give someone money because I know they're just going to spend it on drugs or alcohol or whatever it is. And I often educate people that when you are addicted to something, it's not just, oh, I can stop tomorrow. Your body is naturally having a reaction that needs whatever it is that you've taken until you can get assistance to get off of it. So people will always say, I don't want them to get drunk. But I mean, when you get paid for your job, your boss isn't delegating you as to what you can purchase with the money. So I want to inspire people that when you give something, just give it.
Don't have strings attached or
Exactly.
expectations. How did you come to that wisdom at such a young age?
When I was 6 years old, my dad was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And shortly after that, his life began to change. And he went from living in a barber shop to living in his car to being homeless on the streets of Calgary. Once I knew what homelessness was at that young age, I felt for every single person that I saw on the street. I associated them with my father. So that is what inspires me, and I always just hold, when I see someone, I see my dad, I see someone's brother, someone's cousin, somebody's somebody.
Mhm. Tell me about your film about your dad.
Yes, Finding My Way Back to You. In my second year of university, I had the chance to go back to Jamaica to meet my dad for the first time after 13 years. And I originally wanted to make a documentary then, even though I was in psychology, I knew nothing about film. But when we got there and we got to the board house and we walked down this long jungle path, and my mom had her little iPhone up because I didn't have cameras or anything, I told her, put it down. I don't want to take a photo. And my mom still took a photo, and I was completely shocked. So 2 years later, I dropped out of university because I didn't realize how much that moment impacted me. I was trying to become a psychiatrist, and my dean was saying, are you doing this for you? Are you doing this for your dad? I wasn't really sure. And then that's when I got into film, and this program, Being Black in Canada, came out, and it said write a script. And my friend and DP Wyatt Sawyer, he said, just try and apply. And I wrote the script, and I remember being in a coffee shop writing it and bawling my eyes out, not understanding the process of writing and how internal it is, and letting it out is so much.
That experience you describe of going deep inside yourself and not realizing all of the things that you were trying to process and having that emotion come out. Was that something that you were okay with, or was having to go deep like that something that scared you? How has it impacted you as an artist moving forward?
It was very difficult, but when I got to speak to my dad and tell him what I was doing, he was so excited and he wanted to share his story. And that's what kept me going.
Oh, what a blessing.
And his actual mental state became greater and happier over the past few years as we've begun this process, and as I've told him, because it's his story and I'm just a character in it. So although it was difficult and I cried a lot, I cried through every moment, I just kept pushing through. And today I still have those moments where I look at myself and I say, who am I telling this story for?
Mm-hmm.
And then I drive down the streets of Calgary, and I'll go to the drop-in center, and I'll go just and see people and talk to people. And then I remember why, because there's over 3,000 people a night that are just like my dad. And I'm not just doing it for him, I'm doing it for all of us.
I just think that's so beautiful. And I thank
Thank
you.
you.
I thank you for your humanity
Thank you.
and your love for people. One last question. One of the things that I have found difficult about living in this city as a Black woman who creates and is an artist is watching young Black artists move away. So I guess my question is, how can we as artists in this city, especially the older established artists, what can we do better to make it so that people like you, people from your generation, can stay here and thrive and survive and make a living and tell the stories that are important to you? What do you need in order for that to be a future?
For me to thrive here and for others to thrive, we need support. We need to be celebrated. When I go to Toronto and I look up at Dundas Square, I see billboards with Black people, with Black artists.
Yeah.
And we don't have that here. We look up and we don't see ourselves.
That's right.
We don't see ourselves in executive roles. We don't see ourselves in management roles. And that hurts, especially in my industry on set. And yes, cast is great. Being in front of the camera is great. But what about those who have dreams behind the camera that want to be camera assistants and props and all these
Makeup people and everything.
Exactly. That's the struggle. You know, when I get on set and someone doesn't know how to do my hair, that makes me feel like I don't want to come back because I don't feel confident in myself. Or if I go to an art show and I don't see any Black art being presented, if it's a grand scheme, I just think that we need to be celebrated more in the city of Calgary. And I'm calling on the city of Calgary and all the people that are decision makers to do that, to raise people up.
You're very talented, and you can go anywhere and live anywhere and achieve your goals. But I really hope that we find a way to make it so that this is the absolute best place for you to do your work and to practice your craft. That you wouldn't think that you have to leave this place. That this can be a place for you to work, because I love watching our community grow. I love watching the community of Black artists grow. So I appreciate you, and I'm so pleased that you were willing to come and speak today with me here for this film, and I cannot wait to see what you're going to bring to the world and to the city specifically.
Thank you.
Kamika.
Thank you so much.